Everyone believed the vampire king had forgotten how to feel pain. No one guessed the girl behind the veil carried the same quiet wound.
The ancient hall glowed beneath thousands of flickering candles, their reflections dancing across pillars carved by hands that had long turned to dust. The vampire king stood alone at the highest balcony, watching the elegant gathering below unfold like a carefully staged illusion. Laughter echoed softly through the stone chamber, yet none of it reached his heart. Beauty surrounded him in brilliant gowns and jeweled crowns, but after centuries of meaningless admiration, appearance had become hollow. What stirred inside him now was a heavy loneliness that never fully slept. He had learned to wear silence like a shield. Humans admired his power, feared his legend, and worshipped his reputation, yet no one ever dared truly look at him as a soul instead of a symbol. Every century made his isolation deeper. Immortality did not numb the ache of being unseen. It only stretched it longer. Then came the murmurs. Servants whispered near the tall entrance doors as a veiled guest was announced. The words traveled to him like a cruel breeze. "She is plain," someone muttered. "Why would anyone hide a face unless they had reason?" Another whispered. Curiosity sparked quietly in the king's chest. Not curiosity of appearance, but of spirit. In all his years, he had learned that cruelty often followed misunderstanding, and where there was judgment, there was usually someone quietly suffering beneath it. His gaze followed the small figure as she entered the hall. Her posture was careful, shoulders drawn slightly inward as if she wished to take up less space in a world that rarely welcomed her. The veil cascaded around her face in soft layers, concealing features that had become the subject of rumor before anyone had cared to know the truth. Yet despite her nervous steps, there was something unbreakable in her movement, a steadiness born not of confidence but endurance. He descended from the balcony without command or announcement, weaving gently through stunned guests who parted instinctively before him. Each step felt strangely heavier than the last, as if destiny pressed against his chest. He approached her slowly until they stood only a breath apart. Beneath the veil, her eyes lifted to meet his. He froze. It wasn't beauty or lack of it that caught him. It was the raw honesty shining in her gaze, eyes that had learned to survive the weight of dismissal without bitterness, eyes that had cried unseen but still dared to hope. Something in them mirrored the loneliness he had buried for centuries. His immortal heart stirred painfully. She did not look at him like the others did. There was no fear, no awe, no hunger for favor. Only quiet recognition between two souls who understood what it meant to be misunderstood. Slowly, he raised his hand toward the delicate fabric. The hall seemed to fade into silence. Before his fingers could touch the veil, her hand lifted suddenly and caught his wrist with trembling courage. "Please," she whispered softly, her voice almost lost in the candle-lit air. "Let me speak before you look." And in that fragile moment, the Vampire King realized this meeting would shatter the walls he had built around his heart. Forever her fingers remained wrapped around his wrist, light yet unwavering, as if this single touch carried all the courage she had gathered over a lifetime. The Vampire King did not pull away. The crowd, sensing something unordinary unfolding, gradually fell into a hush. Even the music softened until only the soft crackle of candles and quiet breathing filled the hall. He lowered his hand slightly, giving her space to speak. For the first time in centuries, he waited for words not spoken to him with praise or fear, but with honest vulnerability. "I wore the veil to protect myself," she began, her voice quivering yet firm. "Not from the world's eyes, but from its judgments." Memories spilled from her in halting sentences. Growing up always compared to others, being mocked not for cruelty but indifference, the kind that cuts deeper because it pretends to be polite. Strangers had decided her worth before hearing her voice, before knowing her hopes. She learned to hide not in shadows, but in silence. The veil became her shield, not against ugliness, but against the exhaustion of proving she deserved respect. The king listened without interruption. Every word pierced deeper than he expected. He saw echoes of his own existence reflected in her story. Centuries ago, he too had become something people defined before they understood. Monster, ruler, creature of darkness. No one ever asked how heavy immortality felt. No one ever wondered what loneliness did to a soul that could never rest. The irony twisted painfully inside him. A girl dismissed for her appearance, and a king misunderstood for his power, had both lived imprisoned by stories others created. They never wanted me to remove the veil, she continued softly. They only wanted to believe the rumors were true. The king felt a quiet shame stir within him. How often had he been surrounded by crowds without truly seeing anyone? How many had he judged not by cruelty, but by assumption? Without lifting the veil, he placed his palm gently over her hand still resting on his wrist. The warmth of her skin seeped into him, reminding him that compassion needed presence more than words. "They taught you to hide," he murmured, "but they never broke your courage." Her eyes shimmered, unprepared for kindness where she expected curiosity or polite pity. Behind them, whispers crept back as the guests struggled to suppress their fascination and impatience. Eyes followed their unmoving figures, hungry for spectacle. She glanced nervously toward the growing attention. "They are watching," she said quietly. "They always watch." His gaze hardened, not with anger but with resolve. "Then let them learn what they never bothered to see." She inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of being seen without hiding. Their fingers slowly intertwined, and as the hall grew silent around them once more, the girl realized she no longer feared what waited beneath the veil. She feared what stepping into the light might demand. While the Vampire King realized something far more dangerous. For the first time in his endless life, he was afraid of losing someone he had only just begun to understand. The hush over the grand hall thickened as their hands remained joined. Dozens of eyes hovered on them, searching for scandal or spectacle, unaware that something far more delicate was unfolding. The girl shifted her weight slightly, the instinct to retreat tugging at her muscles. Old habits whispered that survival meant shrinking back, vanishing quietly before judgment could strike again. The Vampire King sensed her hesitation immediately. He stepped closer, not in command but in solidarity, placing himself subtly between her and the watching crowd. The gesture was gentle yet unmistakable. No shield made of steel could have been stronger than the silent promise in his posture. "You are not alone here," he murmured so softly only she could hear. Her breath steadied at the sound of those words. No one had spoken them to her before without conditions attached. Alone had always been her default state. Comfort was something she gave herself, never something offered freely. She looked up at him, struggling to voice the fear twisting her thoughts. "Standing beside me may change what people think of you." His expression softened, touched by a faint sadness that centuries had polished into calm acceptance. "They have always thought something of me," he replied quietly. "It has never matched who I am." Then he turned fully to the audience. The room felt charged, as if an invisible line had been drawn between old expectations and something new struggling to be born. The king slowly lifted his hand from hers and placed it over his heart, a gesture few had ever witnessed from him. "Look closely," he said, his voice resonating through the vast chamber. "You believe you know monsters and beauty, yet how often do you bother to know souls?" The murmurs faltered. Confusion rippled across faces unaccustomed to being challenged by the eternal ruler. Beside him, the girl felt strength blooming where doubt had lived. She straightened her shoulders. The veil no longer felt like armor, but a final wall delaying freedom. Her pulse beat loudly in her ears as she lifted trembling fingers toward the fabric. He watched her silently, not with expectation but unwavering support. As she paused, old memories flooded her mind, laughter behind her back, the careful avoidance in strangers' eyes, mirrors she avoided for years because nothing reflected back except a question she could never answer. The hall waited. Candles flickered. Time stretched thin. Then she whispered, steadying her resolve, "No more hiding." Her fingers caught the edge of the veil. As the silk began to lift, the girl inhaled sharply, and the vampire king held his breath, uncertain whether he was about to witness judgment or the world's quiet awakening. The veil slipped upward inch by inch, its soft fabric whispering against her cheeks as if reluctant to release the face it had protected for so long. The hall felt frozen in suspended breath. Every candle seemed to flicker slower. Even the distant musicians lowered their instruments, sensing instinctively that sound would break something sacred unfolding in silence. When the veil finally cleared her eyes, the first thing revealed was her expression. Not fear, not defiance, but gentle courage. The candlelight rested across her features, exposing a face shaped by warmth rather than flawless symmetry. Her beauty was not the dramatic perfection so often idolized in legend, but something more striking, more sincere. Soft lines formed dimples when she smiled uncertainly. Her eyes shone with vulnerability, layered with resilience built through a lifetime of surviving silent cruelty. The stunned stillness of the crowd lasted only a heartbeat before gasps scattered through the room. Not of disappointment, but shock at how wrong rumor had been. The vampire king felt a weight loosen within his chest. In centuries of power, nothing had prepared him for the simplicity of truth. This woman was not defined by harsh gossip or shallow judgment. She stood before him radiant in one essential way, completely real. He leaned closer to her ear and whispered softly, "They were never looking closely enough." Her breath trembled as tears pooled along her lashes. She had prepared herself for rejection, rehearsed silence for ridicule, protected her heart from hopes too fragile to survive cruelty. Yet here stood someone who looked at her without calculation or pity. For the first time since childhood, she felt seen. Behind them, conversations died mid-word. Many faces showed visible uncertainty. Some guests looked ashamed, realizing how readily they believed stories about a person they had never bothered to know. The king offered his arm slowly. She hesitated, a hesitation born not from doubt, but from the fear of opening her heart to hope again. Then her posture straightened, and she accepted his arm with a soft nod. Together, they took their first step into the illuminated center of the hall. Each pace forward felt symbolic. No veil, no hiding, no shrinking. Yet as the king felt her arm resting against his, an old shadow crept into his thoughts. Centuries had taught him that closeness brought consequences, that anyone bound to his path bore unseen risk. Admiration could turn into envy, attention into danger. His jaw tightened slightly. Protecting her meant more than standing beside her under candlelight. It meant choosing whether to welcome connection into a world that had taught him attachment was always a gamble. As applause slowly began to rise around them, hesitant, scattered, uncertain, the Vampire King felt the sharp edge of fear return. He wondered if, by stepping into the light together, he had just drawn her into a darkness far deeper than rumor ever wrought. Applause drifted unevenly through the hall, polite rather than certain, as if the guests themselves did not yet understand what they were witnessing. The Vampire King and the unveiled girl walked slowly forward, each measured step echoing across the marble floor. He felt the subtle tension in her arm resting against his, a fragile balance between confidence and lingering insecurity. She was not afraid of being seen anymore. She feared believing that safety might truly exist beside him. They stopped beneath the tallest chandelier where candlelight poured around them like a warm halo. Silence gradually returned as faces turned expectant, waiting for the king to claim a triumph or dismiss the moment. Instead, he said nothing for several seconds. For the first time, he allowed the weight of emotion to overtake performance. He looked down at the woman beside him. Centuries of isolation had taught him how to command crowds, but not how to guard another heart. He studied the faint marks of adversity in her eyes, strength shaped not by ease but endurance. This hall was built to honor beauty, he finally spoke, his voice gentle but steady. Yet tonight it must remember something greater. The guests leaned forward unconsciously. Beauty that lives only on the surface fades quickly, he continued. But beauty strengthened by courage survives every storm. A ripple moved through the audience. Some nodded quietly. Others looked unsettled, as though recognizing old judgments they wished they had not made. She squeezed his arm lightly, grounding herself in the truth of his words. Never in her life had she imagined standing at the center of attention without shame curling around her ribs. Yet here she was, breathing steadily beneath open eyes, not misjudged shadow but living presence. The king felt admiration surge within him. But admiration was followed by unease. For centuries, anyone who stood close to him had become a target for envy, violence, or cruel destiny. His crown did not grant safety to those beside him. It often painted them with invisible danger. What kind of protector would he be to her? What promise did he have the right to make? Their gazes met. For a fragile moment, both understood the tension beneath the beauty of the evening. Hope glimmered brightly. Fear waited just beyond it. The king felt the ancient pull of doubt tightening in his chest. And for the first time in centuries, he wondered whether walking beside someone was braver than ruling alone. As the orchestra sounded again, soft and uncertain, the couple remained beneath the candlelight, each silently preparing for a future neither could predict. Return of the music did not quiet the thoughts storming through the Vampire King's mind. Standing beside her beneath the chandelier's glow, he finally understood the fear he carried was not of rejection or danger, but of believing he did not deserve companionship. Eternity had trained him to accept solitude as safety. Opening his heart now felt like stepping unarmed into an unknown battlefield. Slowly, he released her arm, not pulling away from connection, but offering honesty. The movement startled her. For one brief moment, the old tremor returned to her chest, the reflex to assume she had been accepted only until hesitation appeared. She faced him calmly anyway. "Are you stepping back because of me?" she asked gently, "or because you believe you must stay alone?" The question reached deeper than any blade ever could. He looked into her eyes and found not accusation, but empathy. She recognized the wall behind his actions because she had lived behind similar walls for years. "I am afraid," he admitted quietly. "Everyone near me has suffered simply for standing too close." She did not retreat. Instead, she moved closer. "I have already survived suffering alone," she said softly. "Standing beside someone by choice is not a greater danger. It is a greater life." The hall seemed to disappear around them as her words stripped away centuries of guarded isolation. The Vampire King felt something shift permanently within his immortal chest. For the first time, companionship did not seem like weakness. It felt like courage. He took her hand again, not as a protector claiming responsibility, but as an equal offering partnership. "Then we will choose together," he said. He turned toward the waiting crowd. "This woman does not stand here because she fits a rumor or an image," he declared. "She stands here because bravery deserves to be honored more than appearance." The room responded not with thunderous applause, but with something more meaningful. Silence gave way to softened faces and sincere clapping, not driven by obligation but awareness. Hearts were shifting quietly. She stood taller than she ever had before. There was no veil now, no shadow, and no question of worth. As the music lifted once more, the pair joined the dance floor together, not for spectacle but celebration of vulnerability shared. Around them, guests slowly joined the dance, uncertainty fading as inspiration spread. The Vampire King met her eyes and smiled, not as a ruler, not as a legend, but as someone finally allowed to feel human despite immortality. Side by side, they moved forward beneath glowing chandeliers, knowing neither the future nor its dangers could diminish what had already been secured between them. Two hearts that once hid from the world, now choosing to walk within it, unveiled, unafraid, and unbreakably together.